Playing with Power MTG. Powerful cards, powerful formats. Before we begin tonight's game, I wanted to ask a question. Do you have extra cards lying around that you don't use? Want to buy or trade for some extra cards but don't know how to maximize the value? Then you should try out today's sponsor, Card Conduit. Card Conduit is the best service when it comes to selling your extra cards. Don't waste hours trying to find the best buy list price for your cards online. Simply send them to Card Conduit and let them take care of the rest. I've used Card Conduit multiple times already. I always use them for getting the best value of my extra cards and my extra bulk. I get fair prices for my cards and they save me tons of time. They have three main services. Their standard service lets you send them unsorted cards of any value. They will sort, grade, and give you the best price for your cards, including your bulk. Their curated service is similar. Send them your unsorted cards worth over $1 in value. They will charge half of the fee of standard service and then charge no fee per card. Their new sorted service is a great value as well. Choose cards in advance with their selection tool, send them sorted to Card Conduit, and they will grade and buy list them automatically. Save yourself the time of having to send to multiple sites and let Card Conduit do it instead. Their fee is only 2% with no fee per card. So give Card Conduit a try today. If you sign up with my link in the description below or use the promo code POWER, you will also get 10% off of their fees when you use their service. A big thanks to Card Conduit for sponsoring today's video. Our Mox Masters tournament is back. On Saturday, December 3rd, we will be hosting another webcam CEDH tournament. It is 100% proxy friendly and played in the comfort of your own home. Top 16 gets $60, top 4 gets $200, and the winner gets $500. Spots fill up very quickly, so sign up now and reserve your spot. Link is in the description below. We will be going to the Magic Summit in Salt Lake City on November 11th through the 13th. We will be playing with fans and recording games while we are there. Stop on by and say hello. Our Mox Pearls are back for another game. They wanted a rematch against the last time they played, and we will see how they do tonight. Now, let's start out by showcasing our fighters this evening. First, we have Ashani piloting the partner pair of Tymna the Weaver and Thrasios Triton Hero. This deck tries to assemble the breakfast combo by resolving and killing Protean Hulk. Ashani's opening hand contains a Tainted Pact, Gaia's Cradle, Vampiric Tutor, Pact of Negation, Command Tower, Elves of Deep Shadow, and his London Mulligan is a Mystical Tutor. Next, we have Chad piloting Abdel Adrian Gorian's Ward with Candlekeep Sage as the background. This deck seeks to control the board before resolving Displacer Kitten and using that to flicker multiple permanents to storm off and win. Chad's opening hand contains a Jataxian Probe, Enlightened Tutor, Cloud Shift, Brainstorm, Silence, Sea of Clouds, and a Misty Rainforest. After that, we have Sean piloting the partner pair of Pure Imaginative Rascal and Toothy Imaginary Friend. This is also a Displacer Kitten deck. It seeks to storm off using Kitten to flicker permanents to draw cards and win with Lapidary Maniac. Sean's opening hand contains a Mystic Remora, Mana Vault, Worldly Tutor, Force of Will, Brainstorm, Solve the Equation, and a Yavimaya Coast. Finally, we have Dawn piloting Zur the Enchanter. Dawn is one of the original members of Playing with Power who came back to play a few games with us. This is a stacks deck looking to abuse Zur's ability to cheat out powerful stacks and hate pieces before going for a combo finish. Dawn's opening hand contains a Mana Crypt, Talisman of Hierarchy, Chrome Mox, Esper Sentinel, Grand Arbiter Augustin IV, Delay, and a Cavern of Souls. Without further ado, let's kick off this deadly dark decimating decapitation. Ashani had the best school bathroom dance video and gets to start us off. Ashani draws a card for turn and plays a Command Tower. He casts an Elves of Deep Shadow. He passes. Chad draws a card for turn and plays 2 life to cast a Jataxian Probe targeting Sean. He looks at Sean's hand and draws a card. He plays a Sea of Clouds for turn. He casts Enlightened Tutor. He fetches up a Mana Crypt onto the top of his library. Chad passes. Sean draws and plays a Yavimaya Coast. He casts a Mana Vault. Sean ends his turn. Dawn draws and plays a Cavern of Souls, naming Human as it enters. He casts a Mana Crypt. He casts a Talisman of Hierarchy. He casts Chrome Mox, imprinting Grand Arbiter Augustin IV. He taps his Talisman to cast Esper Sentinel. With a strong turn 1 in the books, Dawn passes. Ashani draws and plays a Gaia's Cradle. He casts Drannith Magistrate. Ashani passes. Chad draws and plays a Misty Rainforest. He casts a Brainstorm. Esper Sentinel triggers and Dawn draws. Then Chad draws 3 and puts 2 back on top. He cracks his Misty Rainforest, pays a life, and fetches up a Tundra onto the battlefield. He casts a Mana Crypt and gives the turn to Sean. Sean draws and starts off his turn by tapping his Yavimaya Coast to cast a Brainstorm of his own. Esper triggers and Dawn draws. Then Sean draws 3 and puts 2 back on top. He plays an Exotic Orchard for turn. He casts Mystic Remora. In response, Chad casts Mystical Tutor, paying the Esper tax. He fetches up a Time Twister onto the top of his library. Then Remora resolves. Next, Sean pays 2 life to help cast Phyrexian Metamorph. It enters as a copy of Mana Crypt. Sean ships the turn to Dawn. During his upkeep, Dawn loses his Mana Crypt roll and takes 3 damage. He draws and plays a Misty Rainforest. He casts a Mox Amber. Remora triggers and Sean draws. He cracks his Misty Rainforest, pays a life, and fetches up an Underground Sea onto the battlefield. He moves to combat and attacks Chad with Sentinel. Chad takes it, and Dawn gives the turn to Ashani. At the end of Dawn's turn, Ashani taps his Elves of Deep Shadow to cast Vampiric Tutor. Esper and Remora trigger, and Dawn and Sean draw. Then Ashani fetches up a card onto the top of his library and loses 2 life. The turn moves to Ashani. Ashani draws and plays a Tundra. He casts a Ranger Captain of Eos. It enters, and he fetches up a Birds of Paradise into his hand. He casts Birds of Paradise. He moves to combat and attacks Dawn with Drannith. Dawn takes it, and Ashani passes the turn. During his upkeep, Chad wins his Mana Crypt roll. He draws and plays a Plains. He casts Silence. Esper and Remora trigger, and Dawn and Sean draw. Silence resolves, knocking out his opponents this turn. Chad casts Time Twister. Each player shuffles their hand and graveyard into their library and draws 7. With nothing else, Chad passes. During his upkeep, Sean loses his Mana Crypt roll and takes 3 damage. Also in his upkeep, he pays to keep his Remora. During his draw step, he takes a damage from his Mana Vault. In his main phase, he plays a Polluted Delta. He casts a Mana Crypt. Esper triggers, and Dawn draws. He casts a Soul Ring. He casts a Nurza's Bauble. He cracks his Polluted Delta, pays a life, and fetches up a tropical island onto the battlefield. He casts a Time Twister of his own. In response, Chad casts Pongify, targeting Birds of Paradise. Esper and Remora trigger, and Dawn and Sean draw. Birds is destroyed, and Ashani creates a 3/3/8. Then Twister resolves, and each player shuffles their hand and graveyard into their library and draws 7. Sean cracks his Bauble, looking at a random card in Dawn's hand. Finished up, Sean passes. During Dawn's upkeep, Sean draws a card through Urza's Bauble. Also in his upkeep, Dawn loses his Mana Crypt roll and takes 3 damage. He draws and plays the Tabernacle at Pendrell Vale as his land for turn. He casts a Cursed Totem. Remora triggers, and Sean draws. Dawn moves to combat and attacks Chad with Sentinel. Chad takes it, and Dawn ends his turn. During his upkeep, Ashani taps his Sky's Cradle to pay for his creatures through Tabernacle. He draws and plays a Verdant Catacombs. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Bayou onto the battlefield. He casts his commander, Tymna the Weaver. He moves to combat and attacks Dawn with Ranger Captain, Elves of Deep Shadow, and his Ape, and attacks Chad with Drannith Magistrate. Both take it, and in his second main phase, he casts a Chrome Mox. Esper and Remora trigger, and Dawn and Sean draw. Chrome Mox resolves, and Ashani imprints Noble Hierarch. Ashani ships the turn to Chad. During his upkeep, Chad wins his Mana Crypt roll. He draws and plays an island. He casts a Drannith Magistrate of his own. Chad passes. At the end of Chad's turn, Sean casts Worldly Tutor, paying the Esper tax. In response, Chad casts an Offer You Can't Refuse. Esper and Remora trigger, and Dawn and Sean draw. Tutor is countered, and Sean creates 2 treasures. The turn moves to Sean. During his upkeep, Sean wins his first Mana Crypt roll, and then loses his second roll and takes 3 damage. Also in his upkeep, he pays for his Remora and then pays to untap his Mana Vault. He draws and plays a Command Tower. He casts Wall of Roots. Sean passes, discarding to hand size. During his upkeep, Dawn loses his Mana Crypt roll and takes 3 damage. Also in his upkeep, he pays for his creature through Tabernacle. He draws and plays a Verdant Catacombs. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Godless Shrine into play tapped. He casts Solitary Confinement. The table does a double take, and Dawn passes, discarding to hand size. During his upkeep, Ashani pays for his creatures through Tabernacle. He draws and moves to combat. He attacks Chad with Ranger Captain and attacks Sean with Tymna and his Ape token. Sean blocks the Ape with Wall of Roots, and they all take the rest. Ashani gains 2, and before the end of combat, Chad casts Swords to Plowshares, targeting Tymna. Esper and Remora trigger, and Dawn and Sean draw. Then Tymna is exiled, and Ashani gains 2 life. In his second main phase, Ashani plays an Underground Sea. Finished up, Ashani gives the turn to Chad. During his upkeep, Chad pays for his creatures through Tabernacle. Also in his upkeep, he loses his Mana Crypt roll and takes 3 damage. He draws and plays an Atakar Wastes for turn. Shut off from doing much else, Chad passes. During his upkeep, Sean pays for his creatures through Tabernacle. Also in his upkeep, he pays to keep his Remora. Also in his upkeep, he loses both Mana Crypt rolls and takes 6 damage. He draws and plays a Homeward Path. Also shut off from doing much else, Sean passes. During his upkeep, Dawn wins his Mana Crypt roll. Also in his upkeep, he pays for his creatures through Tabernacle. Also in his upkeep, he discards a card through Solitary Confinement. He skips his draw step due to Solitary Confinement. He plays a Hall of the Bandit Lord for turn. He taps his Talisman, which the damage is prevented through Solitary Confinement, to help cast Necropotence. In response, Chad casts Mana Drain. Esper and Remora trigger, Sean draws, and Chad pays for Esper. In response, Dawn casts Pact of Negation. Remora triggers, and Sean draws. In response, Chad casts Brainstorm, trying to find an answer. Remora triggers, and Sean draws. Brainstorm resolves, and Chad draws 3 and puts 2 back on top. With Pact still in the stack, Chad taps his Atakar Waste to cast Flusterstorm, with all copies targeting Pact of Negation. With nothing else, Flusterstorm counters Pact, and Mana Drain counters Necropotence. Unfortunately thwarted, Dawn passes the turn. At the end of Dawn's turn, Ashani casts Enlightened Tutor. Esper and Remora trigger, Ashani pays for Remora, and Dawn draws through Esper. In response, Sean casts Miscast, paying the Esper tax. Miscast counters Tutor, and the turn moves to Ashani. During his upkeep, Ashani pays for his creatures through Tabernacle. He draws and moves to combat. He attacks Sean with his Ranger Captain and Ape token. Sean blocks Ranger Captain with Wall of Roots and takes the rest. With nothing else, Ashani passes. During his upkeep, Chad pays for his creatures through Tabernacle. Also in his upkeep, he loses his Mana Crypt roll and takes 3 damage. He draws, and in his first main phase he has 3 colorless through Mana Drain. He casts Chain of Vapor, targeting Drannith Magistrate. Esper and Remora trigger, and Dawn and Sean draw. Drannith bounces, and Ashani doesn't continue the chain. Next, Chad casts Grim Monolith. Remora triggers, and Sean draws. He casts Archaeomancer. It enters, and Chad returns Chain of Vapor to his hand. Chad passes. At the end of Chad's turn, Sean casts an overloaded Cyclonic Rift, paying the Esper tax. In response, Ashani casts Pact of Negation. Esper and Remora trigger, and Dawn and Sean draw. In response, Sean casts Flusterstorm, with all copies targeting Pact of Negation. Unfortunately, Ashani has plenty of mana and pays for all of them. Then Pact counters Cyclonic Rift, and the turn moves to Sean. During his upkeep, Sean pays to keep his Remora. He also wins his Mana Crypt roll and loses the Mana Crypt roll and takes 3 damage. He pays for his creatures through Tabernacle. In his draw step, he takes a damage from his Mana Vault. Finally, in his main phase, he plays a Cephalid Colosseum for turn. He casts Teferi, Master of Time. Esper triggers, and in response, Dawn casts Enlightened Tutor. Remora triggers, and Sean draws. Dawn fetches up a Grasp of Fate onto the top of his library. Then Esper resolves, and Dawn draws. Then Teferi resolves. Sean activates Teferi's first ability, drawing and discarding. He casts Eldritch Evolution, sacrificing Wall of Roots as an additional cost. He fetches up a Displacer Kitten onto the battlefield. He casts a Jeweled Lotus. Kitten triggers, flickering Teferi, Master of Time. Sean activates Teferi's first ability since it's now a new instance of Teferi, drawing and discarding. Sean taps his Colosseum to cast Ponder. Kitten triggers, and he flickers Teferi again. He then looks at the top 3, doesn't like what he sees, shuffles, and draws. He activates Teferi's first ability, drawing and discarding. Unfortunately, he ran out of gas and passes, discarding to hand size. During his upkeep, Dawn wins his Mana Crypt roll. Also in his upkeep, he pays for his creatures through Tabernacle. Also in his upkeep, he discards a card through Solitary Confinement. He skips his draw step due to Solitary Confinement. He taps his Talisman, with damage prevented through Solitary Confinement, to cast Grasp of Fate. Remora triggers, and Sean draws. Grasp enters and exiles Ashani's Chrome Mox, Chad's Drannith Magistrate, and Sean's Displacer Kitten. He moves to combat and attacks Teferi with Esper Sentinel. Teferi takes it, and Dawn passes the turn. At the end of Dawn's turn, Sean activates Teferi's first ability, drawing and discarding. During his upkeep, Ashani pays for his Pact of Negation. He also pays for Ranger Captain and his Ape token through Tabernacle, sacrificing the rest. He draws and moves to combat. He attacks Sean with Ranger Captain and his Ape. Sean takes it, and Ashani gives the turn to Chad. At the end of Ashani's turn, Sean activates Teferi's first ability, drawing and discarding. During his upkeep, Chad pays for his creatures through Tabernacle. Also in his upkeep, he loses his Mana Crypt roll and takes 3 damage. He draws and moves to combat. He attacks Sean with Archaeomancer. Sean takes it, and in his second main phase, he casts his background, Candlekeep Sage. Esper and Remora trigger, and Dawn and Sean draw. He casts his commander, Abdel Adrian, Gorian's Ward. It enters, Candlekeep triggers, and Chad draws. Abdel enters and exiles Mana Crypt, Grim Monolith, and Archaeomancer, creating 3/1/1 soldiers. Chad passes to Sean. At the end of Chad's turn, Sean activates Teferi's first ability, drawing and discarding. During Sean's upkeep, Mana Vault, Remora, and both Mana Crypt triggers go onto the stack. In response to all of them, Sean casts Mystical Tutor. Esper triggers, and Dawn draws. He fetches up a crop rotation onto the top of his library. He then activates Teferi's first ability. Everyone knows that he is trying to win on his upkeep over the top of his triggers, so everyone begins discussing what they should do to stop Sean. They decide that they need to band together to stop this attempt. So in response to Teferi, Chad taps his out-of-card waste to cast Chain of Vapor, targeting Cursed Totem in order to let Ashani sack his Ranger Captain. Esper and Remora trigger, and Dawn and Sean draw. In response, Sean casts Crop Rotation, sacrificing his Tropical Island. In response, Dawn casts Force of Will, paying a life and exiling a blue card. Remora triggers, and Sean draws. Crop Rotation is countered, and Chain of Vapor resolves. Cursed Totem is bounced to Dawn's hand, and he sacks a land, continuing the chain, targeting Teferi. Teferi bounces, and Sean sacks his command tower, targeting Ranger Captain. In response, Ashani activates Ranger Captain, sacrificing it. In response, Sean casts Winds of Rebuke, targeting Grasp of Fate. Grasp bounces, and everyone mills too. Grasp leaves, Sean returns Displacer Kitten, Chad returns Drannith Magistrate, and Ashani returns Chrome Mox. Chrome Mox enters, and Ashani imprints Ledger Shredder. Then Ranger Captain's ability resolves, locking out opponents this turn. Then Teferi's ability resolves, and Sean draws and discards. Then Sean resolves his upkeep triggers. He loses his Mana Crypt roll and takes 3 damage. He wins his other Mana Crypt roll. He lets his Remora die. He then pays 4 to untap his Mana Vault. He draws, and with no other resources, and locked out by Ranger Captain, he passes, discarding to hand size. During his upkeep, Dawn discards a card to Solitary Confinement. He wins his Mana Crypt roll. He pays for his creatures through Tabernacle. He skips his draw step due to Solitary Confinement. He casts Rest in Peace. It enters, and everyone exiles their graveyards. He plays an Arid Mesa for turn. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Scrubland onto the battlefield. He casts Helm of Obedience. This is game over for the table, but no one has any answers, so it resolves. Everyone asks who he wants to target first with the ability, but Don says that he can do it in response to players' turns and draw steps. Don, with his guns loaded, passes the turn. During his upkeep, Ashani sacrifices his ape token through Tabernacle. He draws and plays a Morphic Pool. He casts a Felwar Stone, paying the Esper tax. He recasts Drannith Magistrate. Ashani passes. During his upkeep, Chad pays for his Abdel and Drannith through Tabernacle and sacrifices his soldiers. He takes no other actions and passes the turn. During his upkeep, Sean has to win both of his Mana Crypt rolls or he is dead. He rolls for both simultaneously and wins them both. He pays for his Kitten through Tabernacle and draws for the turn. He casts Arcane Signet. Kitten triggers and flickers his Phyrexian Metamorph. It enters as a copy of Helm of Obedience. Next, Sean casts Laboratory Maniac. Now, everyone is in a super bad position because now Sean wants to exile his library. In response, Dawn, hoping someone can counter Labman, activates Helm, targeting Sean, exiling his entire library due to Rest in Peace. Still in response to Labman, Chad casts Opt, looking for an answer. He scries one and draws a card. Unfortunately, no one has an answer, and Laboratory Maniac resolves. Sean casts Sensei's Divining Top. Kitten triggers, targeting Sean's Helm of Obedience. He holds priority and activates Helm, targeting Ashani, exiling his entire library. Then Kitten flickers Phyrexian Metamorph and it enters as a copy of Helm Obedience again. Still in response to Sensei's Top, Chad flashes in an Archivist of Ogma. Then Top resolves. Sean activates Helm of Obedience, targeting Chad, exiling his library. Sean casts Mox Diamond. Kitten triggers, flickering Phyrexian Metamorph, having it enter as a copy of Helm again. Then Sean doesn't discard a land and Diamond goes to exile through Rest in Peace. Sean attempts to activate Helm, targeting Dawn. But Dawn tells him that he has Shroud through Solitary Confinement, so he can't be targeted. So instead, Sean decides to activate a Sensei's Divining Top. He attempts to draw through an empty library through Labman, and Sean wins the game. Ladies and gentlemen, what a banger of a game tonight. Congrats to Sean on his excellent victory. He fought through interaction, stacks, and 3 opponents trying to stop him. With skill, resilience, and let's face it, some good old plain luck, he was able to pull off an absolutely amazing win. We love to see awesome decks like these on the channel, and Sean did not disappoint. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more like this, please consider subscribing. It only takes 2 seconds and helps us out so much. Well, that about wraps it up for this episode. Tune in next time when we duke it out to see who will be king of the competitive EDH table. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time.